This is Conversations with Women in Sales, an award-winning podcast created by Barbara Giamanco, who hosted the first 67 episodes. Listen to interviews with amazing women about their journeys in their sales careers, often discussing sales leadership tips, ideas, and strategies. We aim to inspire women to consider a sales career and for some women to grow into sales leadership. Men, we appreciate your allyship. And now, your host, Lori Richardson.
A big thank you to our sponsor, Skillibrium, for their support of this podcast. Leave subjectivity aside with Skillibrium, where talent meets excellence and innovation to build the next generation of human-centric sales leaders and high-performing teams.
I'm here today with Marva Bailer. Marva and I have known each other for a while, and we have been at some events together. I've seen her speak a number of times. She does lots of QBRs and is a keynote speaker. Marva is also founder of Qualix, and she's strategic advisor at Skillibrium. Skillibrium is our sponsor this year. I'm very happy to have Marva here, and we'll touch on Skillibrium toward the end. But first, Marva, I wanted to welcome you and ask you to tell us a little bit about your sales leadership background, because you have quite an extensive set of companies that you've worked for, and also just a lot of lessons learned. Welcome.
Great to be with you again, Lori. It was so fun when we got together in Arizona at a women's leadership conference. And that was actually post-COVID. So it was like we cut the seal and we're like, hey, we're all out meeting each other. So yeah, I have a really, I guess I'll call it a portfolio career. And when I talk about my career, I usually like to talk about it as a lattice. And I actually do enjoy gardening. I know you like gardening and flowers as well. Who doesn't like flowers? And what I mean by that is rather than always taking steps up, I went back and forth because I always like a challenge. And the biggest jobs I've got within my career were always because somebody else left and I was the last woman/man standing, and I raised my hand, and that's how I got the job. So every job, the big jobs I had, I really didn't get with a lot of thought and intention. So I started, actually, I was an entrepreneur when I was, if you want to go back all the way to my early years, and even before I could drive, I actually was an entrepreneur making over $50 a week. I made jewelry and metal shop, and then I was an Avon lady when I got my license, and that was a really big deal back then. There was no social media, and there really wasn't stores to buy makeup. So I did that, and then I got into the health club business, teaching aerobics. And I know that might not be relevant to it today, but it actually is, because now I look back at what everyone's investing in, and they're all investing in personal development, health and wellness, and really mindset thinking. And that's what I started my career in. So I got very deep into teaching aerobics. And then, yes, somebody left, and I soon became the sales manager of the health club. And then I became the sales manager of 21 health clubs by the time I was 20 years old. And I was making close to $40,000 a year by that time. Yeah. And so I was not going to go to college, because why would you go to college if you have this glamorous career working out? And I was on TV commercials, and we did a lot of events, and it was very fun. And I actually really learned a lot about sales and overcoming objections and personal selling and what really mattered to people, because at the time there wasn't a lot of information about health and how you were gaining weight and changes in when you got married and when you got pregnant. And so we asked some super personal questions. So then I got more into the health and science of fitness, and really connected with the people. And my mother was a professor, and she said, no, you're going to college.
I read that. What was she a professor of?
She was a professor in dental hygiene. And she actually was a groundbreaker in that area, and was the first woman to serve on the American Dental Association board. It took 71 years for a woman to be on the board.
Wow. That's
Yeah. So she wasn't in sales, but she did a lot of public speaking, and she was obviously a professor. So she was definitely a great orator and knew how to connect with people. But she said, no, you're going to college. And obviously she had advanced degrees. And so I did go to college, and I actually graduated with my master's, fast forward, in 5 years. So I did undergraduate and master's program all within 5 years. And all along, I was still working. I worked a 40-hour work week at the health club. And then I went to a career fair, and this was in the .com area, and I lived in the Maryland, DC area, and I quickly was immersed and got a job in selling typewriter maintenance. Again, we're going back in time, but I guess my point is, for those of you that are listening, it takes steps on how you get there, and you might not really be planning along the way. So at the time, a typewriter and word processor was the number one productivity device on everyone's desk. And although that's not relevant to today, no one uses that technology, it still is relevant, because if you think about AI and data and cloud technologies, how we're talking about all these new era things, there's
Yeah.
always be a new era thing. So it's important to understand that every step you take in your career will lead you somewhere else.
Yeah. And then you got into tech.
And then I got into tech big time. My first real tech job was cabling all the court systems, including the Supreme Court. And my fun fact, this is a little off color, is I've been under every Supreme Court justice's desk. And this is when Clarence Thomas, Ruth Ginsburg was in office. And I was selling basically their connection to the internet, and they didn't want these strangers coming into their offices. And at the time, you physically had to crawl under the desk to get the serial numbers. And I did it. And that life lesson there is, you gotta do everything. So when you're selling, if you're the leader, your customer might say, "Nope, I want you in that meeting. I don't want your team." And you have to respect your team, and you might have to do some of the hard work. And it was great. So I had to do a lot of traveling. I went to a lot of cities I had never been to, and I learned that pretty fast. I also learned about partnering. So at the time, we were a small business, and I learned how to partner with the large federal contractors. I learned how to do GSA schedules, which is a contract vehicle if you want to sell to the federal government. I learned all that business. I had never planned on doing any of that, but that's what happened. And
Wow.
then from there, my big job was a company called Micromuse that's called NetCool. And guess what? NetCool still exists. It's been 23 years. And NetCool is now part of IBM Watson X. But really, what it allowed you to do is have visibility of your network. So now, networks before were pretty much routers and switches. Now, as we know, with the cloud, it's fully integrated, and there's so many different devices out there. And so that product had emerged. So that was my biggest job, was working for Micromuse, and then we got acquired by IBM. And then IBM was also my largest job, because I had global scope of over 400 direct employees and a billion, yes, $1 billion quota.
Wow.
And that's the other thing I'll say. Having $1 billion quota versus having $100 million quota, it's really all the same. And when you're thinking about skills and what makes a great salesperson and what makes a great sales leader, it really is being comfortable talking about money. I know recently, fast forward, when I worked at Splunk, we actually used an assessment for hiring at one time during COVID. And talking about money, being comfortable talking about money, was one of the number one indicators of success of that person.
Yeah.
So I think back to my career where I was comfortable talking about money. I knew how much rent was. I knew how much gas was. I knew how much insurance was. I knew how much, of course, clothes and shoes. And a lot of people don't, their parents shield them from that, or they don't really talk about how much money they make. Or thinking back of how we met at a women's equity conference.
Yeah.
And my mother, I'm glad you asked. I appreciate you asking me about my mother, but early on, she was telling me about pay equity. So she made 50% less than the male professors. And
Ah,
yeah, and I didn't really realize it until now, because as my father worked in the federal government, my mother was a university professor, and that's public information now. And so
right.
with the internet, you can see everyone's salaries and transparency. And yes, women professors got paid less than male professors.
Wow. It's amazing to me, and I'm going to be talking about this coming up because there's a new study that's about to come out about women in sales still making less than men, and not as much less. Why would managers make less if you're female rather than male? It's so interesting. And it's happened for years and years. I guess that's part of it, is that people just haven't said, you know what, we're going to fix this. Like some companies like Salesforce did that. They worked really hard at equity for male and female employees, but clearly it's still a topic, unfortunately. So I know we have so many things to talk about, and I could talk with you for probably 2 or 3 hours, but that would be too long. Too
And
long.
pay equity is something I would love to talk about, but
Yeah.
yes, that was
Maybe
we
next time we're gonna have you back on as part of the Skillibrium series. But we were talking earlier about emotional intelligence, and there are a lot of different aspects of it, but communication skills were one area, right? That was something that you're pretty passionate about.
Yeah, I'm really passionate. We were talking about actually self-awareness and communication skills. Now, obviously, it's not going away, whether we have hybrid work, remote work, whatever kind of work. The whole idea of communicating is always going to be a constant. And we need to really just appreciate where people are at and then also appreciate the technology we're using. You and I have grown up with faxes, emails. I was just watching
Pagers.
Seinfeld yesterday. And they had the faxes, memos, being in the office, not being in the office. But all of it, a lot of it does come down to power and authority. We're trying to have collaboration, but a lot of it comes to power and authority. So I was thinking about this yesterday of the whole idea when we actually were in the office and you would see someone go in someone's office and you're like, what's that meeting about? Why am I not in that meeting? And now people can see people's calendars and they're like, why am I not on that meeting? What's this one-on-one about? So people are always, they got the spidey sense up, and as much trust that you have with people, people are still people, and we are working in competitive environment. You might not be competing per se the way you might think of competing, but you are competing for time and resources. And then some companies are very competitive, and that's just their culture. So it's really something to think about. So the ideas of areas that I'm really interested in is two ideas. One is the whole digital body language and how when we approach people, I actually took a class from a woman named Erica Dwan. She is the top female speaker right now, keynote speaker. And we took a class. And when I was at Twilio as part of our executive offsite, and she had 5 different ways of saying thanks in Slack, believe it or not. 5 different ways. Thank you with a period, with a little emoji, all different. And she literally talked about this topic for 1 hour, just that one topic. And I was sitting with people that were over the age of 50, and half of them were male, and the male ones just said, I give up. I don't need to learn this. This was
Oh, wow.
what are you talking about this? I'm sure there's other things to talk about. And I copiously took notes and thought about it. And then I went back and talked to my kids, and they both work for Fortune 500 companies. They're client facing. And both of them said, oh, yeah, if someone just put a random calendar or said hello, or a superior texted me or Slack me, I would be concerned because number one, that's outside of our processes. We track everything. One of them used Teams, one of them used Google Docs. So that was interesting. So they thought of this kind of outside of a process of being not following the rules, which I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then they also said, Lori, if you and I have this off chance conversation, and by the way, we're in a work stream, then that's not going to be fair or productive to the rest of the people in our team. And I was like, wow. So that all of that dialogue that I had with them was not what we're saying. We're saying, oh, they don't know, they're distracted, whatever. But I actually got the opposite. They actually were very respectful of the processes. And so I would say sometimes maybe people that are more comfortable with technology or older generations might, these informal impromptus, I can see why they're stressful because they are against the processes in your organization. And if you're trying to be fair and equitable, maybe it's not fair and equitable. So it just made me think,
thoughtful. They're being very thoughtful and not what some people would think. They only want to tax and you said earlier when we were talking that if you just say hi and you're an executive, sometimes it can be really intimidating to someone receiving it. Like, why is my boss's boss even saying anything to me without some context, right?
yeah, and that is just so sad because that one, there's like mixed messages. So the recent articles, if you look at LinkedIn News, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, the kind of the news on what the culture is right now, they're literally telling CEOs to get out of their offices, walk around and meet people. So literally they might have some executive coach that said, great, Lori, this week, I want you to talk to 5 people and I want you to reach down inside your organization, get to those high potentials and just make a connection. So you're like, oh, great. I'm a friendly person. I can do this. And you get there, you go on Slack because that's the easiest way to approach people without being so formal. And you send someone a note. I would probably think it was like a hack, like a phishing attack, like if someone sent me that.
Huh.
E and then also, we also forget, "Hello, you're the CEO of the company," or, "Hello, now you're the SVP. Hello, yeah, now you're the CRO." Where before, you might have worked at this company 20 years, and maybe you were like, AWS, great example. Matt Garman, he was an intern. So there's so many people, like he was an intern with them. So he has a different familiarity and he probably feels great talking to interns and interns want to talk to executives. But now when you're an employee, you're like, whoa, what's the person 3 levels up? Why are they contacting me? Am I allowed to have this conversation?
Right.
We just really need to think about that. Now, again, the coaching, the reverse, that's probably how I've gotten literally all of my jobs where I was the one who was approachable. I was the one who invited the executive when they were in town and they're like, hey, get me some meetings. I'm here for this board meeting or I'm here for this customer, whatever. I have 5 hours to kill. No one else wanted to deal with it because when you deal with executives, you have to do prep notes and all these extra work and you don't want to do it. I wanted to do it. I saw that as this is my advantage because 100% of the companies I work for, thinking back, were never headquartered where I lived. So I lived in DC, I lived in Maryland, DC, and I live in Atlanta now. They were never headquartered there. They were always either in New York or most of them were all on the West Coast. So I was like, hey, we're here on the East Coast. Look at us. We want to,
We'll get you meeting.
look at your meetings.
That's great. That's great. So what other self-awareness ideas are you thinking about? Because you went through a whole course about digital body language, and I'm just wondering what other takeaways you had.
Yeah, so on the digital body language, the other takeaways that I had, and I also learned this a lot for one of my roles where I did have a very diverse team as far as time zones and age and experience. My team wanted to work asynchronously. So that meant this Zoom call we're having right now, they didn't want to have Zoom calls. They actually wanted to work in writing. Also, if you look at Amazon's culture, they're actually a writing culture, not a long writing culture, but they actually, you collaborate and you show your results and you ask questions in written form. So I would say that's actually something we need to learn because as salespeople, especially me personally, I made it through grad school doing presentations. And I'm sure there's many people on this call and your podcast listening that you're them where you're like, oh, write the paper, do the research, pay for all this stuff. No, I'll volunteer to make the presentation. Everyone's, oh, bless you,
Yeah.
because no one will do it. So now that kind of charisma and being the only one that can make a presentation, that's great, but that can't be your only form of communication. So that was my other really big takeaway that you have to embrace the writing culture as well as the speaking culture. Another assessment I just did recently is called the Why Institute. And it's really interesting because it's about everyone says your why, and we're all Simon Sinek big followers. But the Why Institute really looks into how you make decisions. And that's pretty interesting because what I found was not all leaders are the same and they have different archetypes. They have 9 or 10 different archetypes. And my archetype, my why is I want and I believe in a greater cause. And my how is I make things simple and easy. Where someone else's how might be they gather a lot of information, or someone else's how might be they ask a lot of questions, or someone else's how might be they need exact details and facts to make a decision. So it really, so someone literally could want tons of information and need all the information and make it complicated, and that might be their decision making style. Whereas mine is I like to make things simple. So I really, again, it's just appreciating where other people are coming from really helps a lot, as well as your own self-awareness.
Yeah, that what I think about is that you are a lifelong learner. You're always learning. You dived into AI, which is really exciting, and that ties in with Skillibrium, who is our sponsor. Can you tell me why you decided to become an advisor for them?
Absolutely. Two things on AI. One is I actually self-funded to go to Harvard executive education for AI. And I really encourage you to look at some of these executive programs. Harvard, by the way, is partners with MIT. There, a lot of their professors actually went to MIT and now they're at Harvard and they co-collaborate on work. And you might say, I can never do that. I'm not a technologist. I don't even have a degree in technology. But if you've been working with these technology companies, particularly data, for the last 5 to 10 years, you're going to be a great student. So I really would encourage you to do that. And Skillibrium, so my new area that I want to work on is I am quote retired or I've left my corporate experience and I want to do board work. And one of the best ways to do board work is to be an advisor to a company. And when you advise, you're in the company, but you're on the outside looking in and you're able to really make impact and give that just kind of truth telling and advice to help them move fast. And why I'm so passionate about Skillibrium, it's around talent. And I really think if I didn't get into sales, I would have got into HR. I actually have a master's degree in organizational development. And so I'm just fascinated by humans and talent. And there's so many different areas that Skillibrium's covering with their coaching platform because they're really trying to connect all the different areas of sales and marketing and pre-sales and post-sales and customer success and how there's like a thread that ties all that together. But the area I'm super interested around is around performance management, and they've really gotten that. So I work for companies that use what's called the 9 box. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So that's when you have to like rank people and you put them in these different quadrants. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, at two of the companies I work for, it's public knowledge and it was known if you were in the you're low skill, low will, you're not promotable, then
Yeah.
as soon as there was time to have a cut, that was the people that were
Wow.
cut. Maybe it's better than these surprise layoffs we're having because at least people knew where they stood. And the idea with these 9 boxes is it's not supposed to be your talent always and at every company, but it's your skills, your attitude, your pay scale, everything at that point in time. So you could still be very successful somewhere else or in another role within that company. But at that time, they were doing that. And now what they do is and it's really a more modern one. It's called Skill Will, and it's just 4 boxes. And but it's really focusing on, do you have the guts and the desire to do the work? But maybe there's certain skills you need, and then really being specific on what the skills are. So the skill could be something technical, or it could be global, or it could be something such as an industry acumen, but really understanding what those skills are. Or it could be a sales skill, such as discovery, or maybe you're not closing your deals quickly, or you're terrible at forecasting. So then they get into really being prescriptive. So then when you're making your evaluations and doing your development plans, it's a career building and it also is performance building and it's objective, not subjective. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm so passionate about, as you can
Yeah.
tell.
And we know so many companies that their managers don't code. And so having a platform that can encourage this is really great and help to just have a good platform to keep track of performance, I think is really missing. And it's been done poorly for so many years, especially in sales, right?
Sadly, it has. And when you say coach, it's so interesting because everyone loves the sports analogies, military analogies, but really the sports analogies. And we watch these great videos from the movie clips, and then someone has some kind of mantra that everyone gets behind. But that's not necessarily coaching. You need to really identify the skills. And now what we're really learning today, and this is what I think people can really relate, especially people that are parents or they're involved with kids in some way, maybe from their local communities, whether it's religious or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or any kind of sports. But they really are starting to learn that the kids don't learn the same and you can't coach everyone the same way. And there might be something new, that a skill that someone doesn't have, or the communication you're giving. So when people really understand that, and if you have a platform that maybe can teach the leader, because maybe the leader doesn't even recognize that because they just haven't had that breadth of experience, that's super helpful. And the other thing I really like about Skillibrium, and I know we're going to have you on there, is they have this idea. It's called Journeycast, which is like a podcast because people love podcasts, just like your podcast that you have. It's amazing. People, they want to be in our living rooms with us hearing our conversations. And so they took us, and what they're doing is it's called just-in-time learning. And we have the top leaders in the world on there. And if you have any of your listeners want to participate, and we have them talk about different topics, so like discovery or value creation or whatever it might be. And we do these little clippets. And then the idea is when you're coaching someone, that snippet could come up and they can watch it so they can learn, because everyone forgets. That's also, there's so many studies about forgetting. And even if you're the smartest person, you just forget. So it's really that context and just in time and just in the moment coaching. So that's what I'm also really excited about.
Yeah, we learn through repetition and reinforcement, and we just need bits of learning, not tons of learning at any one time. We have so much more to cover. I know we're going to do another session, have a great conversation in the future, but how can people reach you, Marva Bailer?
That's it, marvabailer.com. It's my first and last name all together. I have marvabailer.com, and then also my LLC, which is called Qualex, and that encompasses all my board work and keynote speaking. So either of those websites, and then I'm very accessible on LinkedIn, but make sure you write me a note. Otherwise, I won't know if you watched Lori's great podcast, and I'd love to connect with you and have a conversation.
Yes, that makes a difference. Just mention podcast or something so Marva knows. I'm the same way. It's when you have a whole bunch of incoming requests, I go for the messages first. I look to see who connected with me in some way, and those are the first ones I accept. So that's a really good tip. Marva Bailer, thank you so much. It's so great to see you, and continued success, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Lori. Have a great day, and surround yourself only with people going to lift you higher, and you're one of those people. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conversations with Women in Sales. You can find all of our episodes at womensalespros.com/podcast. Help us spread the word, and let's change the face of B2B sales.